Hey guys, it's Austin with Out Jeeping. In today's video, it's going to be a part 2 to our series on installing a 3-link on a Jeep Cherokee. Now if you haven't seen the first video, you want to check that out first so you know where we left off. But today we're just going to be finishing it up and installing the 3 links. So let's get started. So first thing I'm going to do is lift the front part of the Jeep up, and that way we can get the tires off, and then we can start disconnecting stuff that goes to the axle. Alright, so there's going to be some parts of this video where I have to do a voiceover because the first time I upload this video, I use some background music that's no longer free to use. But hopefully you guys can bear with me and I'll help explain this the best I can. So as you can see, I got the front end of the Jeep up in the air and we can start taking off components to help install our new 3-link suspension. And I'm going to start off with the sway bar links. That's actually holding up some of the suspension right now and it's not at full droop. And I got some rough country aftermarket sway bar links on here, and you're attached to the axle with a 3/4 inch bolt. So I'm going to undo those first. But before I do that, as you can see, I have a jack underneath the front axle. So that way it eliminates a little bit of tension on those bolts and we won't have the axle drop down once we get those bolts out. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and repeat the process on the other side. Alright, so now I'm going to take our sway bar links and just push them out of the way for now. The next thing I'm going to do is actually remove the entire front axle from underneath the Jeep. This is not required, but for me, I want to go ahead and paint this up nicely, and there's only a few extra steps to remove this completely, such as removing your track bar, drive shaft, your breather hose for your front axle, your brakes, and your shocks. Alright, so I have a few more things removed from the front axle. Like I said earlier, it's not necessary, but one thing that is your shocks. What you're going to notice is that your shocks are going to be limiting how far your axle travel can fall down to. So this is definitely going to help if you remove them to be able to drop down the axle even further. And right now I'm running some aftermarket rough country shocks for a 4.5 inch lift. On the bottom axle side, if they're the factory bolts, they're going to be a 13mm head. Otherwise, if you replace them before, they're probably going to be some 5/16 grade 8 hardware. So that's what I got going on here. I'm going to remove that. Now to be able to remove the top side, you're going to have to get inside from the engine bay. And with these rough country shocks, they're going to be a 9/16 nut. So I'm going to use a deep socket on that to get that off. And coming over to the driver's side, it's going to be located right underneath the master cylinder. It's going to be a little bit difficult to get to, so if you have a ratchet wrench, that's really the way to go for this nut. So once you get that nut off on the top side of the shock, you're going to have a retainer holding down a rubber bushing, and from the underside you're going to have another bushing and a retainer as well. Now if you are removing the lower part of the shock, factory bolts are going to be a 13mm, and aftermarket, which is what I got, is just going to be a 1/2 inch. Then if the shock is still kind of stuck in there, you can take a flat screwdriver, pry it out on the bottom. Now if you're removing your coil spring for any reason, you can remove the retainers that are on the bottom here. There's going to be one on each side and they're going to be a 13mm. Alright, so now we can start taking off the control arms. I'm going to start with the bolts that are connected to the axle. That way we still have rigidity from the rest of the Jeep when we're getting them off if they happen to be too tight. And these are going to be a 21mm. Now you want to make sure you have a jack underneath the front axle in case it drops any more. That way it'll keep it nice and sturdy and it won't fall dramatically. So I'm going to start getting these. I already broke them free on both sides, and right now I'm just going to zip them out. Alright, so once you get the two lower control arms disconnected from the front axle, you just have the two upper ones. From factory, they have what they call flag bolts, I guess. And basically, it has, just a flag that catches on the other side, so all you have to do is back off a nut. Now, since I replaced this axle with a high pinion, and it used to be a low pinion because it's 2001, I replaced these bolts with just regular 9/16 bolts, so I don't have to worry about that. A lot of people have a problem when removing these flag bolts is because they don't actually catch like they're supposed to, because it's a little bit tougher since it may be rusty and it'll just keep spinning. Now to fix that, what I did last time was just to take a vice grips to hold on to the other side while you're removing it, and then just heat up the nut so it helps make it come off a lot easier. But for right now, I'm just going to take off these 9/16 bolts, and it should go pretty fast. Alright, so now we got the axle completely out of the Jeep, as you can see here. And there's going to be a couple things we need to do to get ready for the 3-link. One is we need to change out this bushing with the one that's provided. The new one that's provided is basically a Heim joint, and so we need to press this out. And there's a variety of different ways you can do it. You can either use some sort of puller, or just hammering it out, or a bunch of weird stuff to whatever get that loose. Now over here we can remove the upper control arm bracket that's welded to the axle. We won't be using this at all since it is a 3-link, and it's going to be using the driver's side instead. So I'm basically just going to be cutting all of this metal out and then grinding it away so it's nice and smooth. You can actually leave this on here if you have to. It's not going to contact anything, but it just looks a lot cleaner with it off. So I'm going to be doing that, and in the meantime just cleaning up the axle and painting it so it all looks nice since it is a little bit rusty. Alright, so when removing this upper control arm bushing, the best method I found is just to use a big chisel like this, and then use a hammer and then work it from each side. And then it seems like it's wiggling out. Alright. Now before installing the new bushing that's provided in the kit, I'm going to put that in the freezer for a while and make sure that it gets nice and cold. That way it'll be a little bit smaller. So when putting them in, it should be a lot easier because when things get cold, they shrink. So it'll be easier to get that in. And then if you want, you can also heat this up with a torch just to make it so it slides in a lot better. But I'm just going to use a light sandpaper just to make sure you get all the gouges and any rust if it has built up. That way it should go in nicely. So as you can see, you want to make sure you hammer on the outside lip. If you're using this technique, you do not want to hit here, otherwise you will damage this bushing. But that's pretty much installed as it is. So now we can finish up removing the lower control arms from the Jeep, and these are also going to be a 21mm. Next, we got to remove these upper control arms from the Jeep, and to do that, there's going to be a 15mm nut on the back side of the frame over here. And if you look through this hole, there's actually a flag bolt that goes through here, so we don't have to put any wrench to hold this because it's just going to spin and lock against the frame as we take it out on this side. Now, it is going to be a little bit difficult because you can only fit a wrench on this side before it hits the starter for the engine. The best way I like to do it is just to heat up the nut and it comes right off. Now, you can't really do that on the driver's side because the fuel rail's right there, but I was still able to get that side off with just a breaker bar. Alright, so now we got to be careful when pulling this out. You don't want the bolt to fall down into the frame. So you want to stick your fingers in there and then try to pull it out. There you go. Alright, so now we need to remove the lower control arm brackets that are welded to the frame. And the way I'm going to do that is start off with a reciprocating saw and cut out all these big chunks around here. And it's going to be kind of difficult because they're all a bunch of pieces of metal sandwiched and spot welded together. So you just got to like pick different spots to start at. I'm probably going to go right here, follow it down with this line, and then keep hacking away at it. And then if I need to, I'll use a cutoff wheel, get other little pieces, and then grind it down. Now, you can just grind it down so it looks nice. I mean, you don't have to take it completely off because this bottom plate is also welded to the frame. So I'm probably just going to do that. And then when I get frame stiffeners for the front in the future, I will get that off completely. But just for now, for it to look good and clear the new long arms, we got to cut this out. Alright, so here's what the final product looks like when you're cutting away at that bracket. I just touched it up with some paint and it looks nice. Also got some extended bump stops in. These are made by Daystar if you're interested. Alright, so now we're ready to put in the new 3-links, and I'm going to start off with measuring out the lower control arms, and I basically just did a couple threads out from all the way in, and this usually gives a good measurement if you have like a 4.5-inch lift. I've already installed 2 of these kits on a couple of buddies' Jeeps, and it seems like this works out best for the alignment. And then we can adjust our caster with the upper control arm once we have it all in the Jeep. But not all links are exactly the same size, so that's always good to take a tape measure and go from center hole to center hole on each of the control arms and measure and make sure they're both the same. On these ones, it turned out to be 33.5 inches. So now I'm going to install these onto the Jeep. The hind joint side, this goes onto the cross member, and then we got the bushing side that goes to the axle. So I'm going to start off with the 2 lowers, and then we're going to put the coil springs in place and then get the upper control arm bolted on, and then we can see where our caster is and then make adjustments from there. Now on this upper link, we have a bolt that was provided. It actually has a Zerk fitting on the end, and it has a little hole, so you can basically grease up that hind bushing that we put in the axle, and that's going to be the point there. And then on the other side of the lower control arms, we have a Zerk fitting for the bushing right there. So we'll grease that all up when we get it all put into the Jeep. Alright, so when installing these control arms, you want to make sure we put a lot of anti-seize on the bolts in case you have to take it off in the future, especially if you live in a rust belt, you'll get a lot of rust. And I just put a little bit on these spacers that go in the hinds because it seems like since they're aluminum, they like to corrode with the steel in there. So I put some of that in there, and now we can fit this into here on the cross member. And then I can take a 5/8 bolt and with a 1 washer, and then we can fit it through. Then on the back side, they have another washer, and then they have a locking nut. So you don't need to put any Loctite on these. Because they got that lock nut, it keeps it nice and tight on the threads. I'm going to leave these bolts nice and finger tight right now. We don't need to tighten them down until everything is all aligned. Then we can cinch everything down. Then you can do the same thing with the other side lower control arm and the upper control arm on the cross member. So now we can fit our coil springs into place. Alright, so the next thing you got to do is have the front axle hook up to your 3 links. I start off with the 2 lower ones, and we're going to be reusing the lower bolts right here. And on the upper one, they come with a brand new one, like shown before. And it's going to take a couple people to help get it all lined up to get the 2 started. Then we'll put on the coil springs, and then the upper control arm, and then start to jack it up so it sits at ride height, and then check our caster angle. Alright, so I got all the links connected to the axle along with the track bar and the coil springs. And now I got it jacked up on the axle so that the weight of the Jeep is fully on the axle and that they're no longer on the jack stands. So now's the time where we can check our caster. I just did a guess on the upper link, so I don't know what it's going to be at right now. Now the way I'm going to check it is with this angle finder right here. This is, I bought this off of Amazon, about 25 bucks, and it's magnetic on one side. So you can zero it out against the flat spot on the frame and then put it on a flat spot on the axle, which is on the back side over here, and then it'll give you the degrees you're at. So I'm going to start off there, and it looks like it's going to be a little bit higher because we got a pinion angle a little bit. We want to make sure that the pinion is pointed at the transfer case the best we can without sacrificing too much caster. Then you can set it on the frame here where it's nice and flat. I got frame stiffener, so I know it's going to be nice and flat. And then we can click zero it out. And then we can move it to the flat spot of the knuckle right under here and stick it on. And we're reading at about 10 degrees right now, so that's a little bit higher. Our goal for a 4.5-inch lift is to be between 5 and 7. So what I'm going to do is actually lengthen the upper control arm, and that's going to help bring the angle of the whole axle a little bit forward. So I'm going to drop the suspension and take off this upper arm where it's connected to the axle, and then I'm going to spin it clockwise because it's actually reverse thread, so if it goes clockwise it's going to extend out. So you can play with the suspension a little bit, go up and down. It seems like that when you drop it all the way down, you get more room to work and it's less tension on this upper link. I'm going to start with about 4 rotations. Alright, now I'm going to jack it all the way up again so that all the weight is on the front axle. And now we can take our angle finder again and recheck the angle. You might have to do this a few times just to get it right. Alright, so it's reading about 8.3 degrees, so probably a couple more turns and we'll be perfect. Alright, so as you can see, the Jeep is all together. It's actually a couple weeks later. I didn't film the rest of the process putting it back together because I was in a time crunch. But once you have your correct caster angle, you want to basically start putting everything else back onto the axle the way it came off. Now, if you did change the caster angle from what it was originally before you did the 3-link, you're going to want to check your toe because that's probably going to be off, and along with that is your drag link, so your steering wheel probably won't be centered. Now, depending on what steering setup you have, here I got crossover steering, so I have to take off the joint and spin around the Heim joint to lengthen or shorten the distance. It's a little bit more tedious, but if you just have like a stock steering, or either just twist the adjustable bar, or sometimes they have little collars that adjust and then tighten back down. Now, doing this alignment here is just to get you on the road. I recommend getting a professional alignment, that way you can save your tires for any possible funky wear. So once you get the steering all back on, you can go and put the brakes back on, which is pretty self-explanatory, and then get the wheels on, and then put the Jeep on its full weight, and then when it's all the way on the ground, that's when you can go and tighten up the 3 links. Now, I recommend on the Heim joint side of the 3 links is to use a dry lube like this right here. It basically sprays on clear, but then you want to let it dry, and then it gets to a nice film, and basically helps lubricate and doesn't attract any dirt. Alright, so now over on the front axle side, you have little Zerk fittings where the rubber bushings are. There's one on the lower control arm here, one on the other side, and then we have one up above that goes on the bolt head for the upper link. Basically, we just want to take some grease and then start greasing these up until we see grease coming out of the sides. Right there is good. Now we can do the rest. Alright guys, that's going to be a wrap for today's video. Unfortunately, the 3-link kit that I installed on this Jeep is no longer available for purchase. So I'll put a link in the description below on another company's brand that's pretty much the same, if not identical, install process, so you guys can check it out and possibly purchase it for your own Jeep if you're interested. But if you guys want to see this 3-link suspension in action, I got a couple off-roading videos you guys can check out. I'll put them at the end of the video as well as in a link in the description below, so you guys can check that out. If you guys have any questions or comments on this install process, make sure to drop it below and I'll be happy to answer. If you guys liked this video and found it helpful, make sure to like and subscribe to the Out Jeeping YouTube channel, and make sure to hit that bell button so you guys get notified every time I upload a new video. So I want to thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next video.